Here we go again. This is Harry Grambua speaking from Rogers City, Michigan. And today is July 4th, 1944. It's about 10 o'clock in the morning. It's kind of an overcast day. And temperature is about 70 degrees. I am 82 years old. And looking out over the back lawn, which is nice and green. And it's just a good day for the 4th of July. Now, my brother George Grambua and my sister Ernestine Wilson have asked me to record my remembrances of great-grandmother Paitke. Great-grandmother was Louise Cool Rue Wetzel Paitke. Apparently I'm the only one left of the immediate family that had known her. My remembrances of her come from the Dramberg family, or the Dramberg farm in Metz, where she spent many years living with Grandma and Grandpa Dramberg, and where I, as a youngster, spent a lot of time visiting with Grandma and Grandpa Dramberg. Now, Grandma Paitke was Grandma Dramberg's grandmother. And in those days, children and grandchildren took care of their own elders. Probably a few of the older people could have gone to a poor house, as there was no Social Security, there was no foster care homes for the elderly, and that is supported by Medicare and Medicaid as we have it today. Now, you all have copies of the William Hardy's Family Genealogy, that the last one was put together by Nancy Collison. And Nancy, you did a good job. That explains the origin of great-grandmother Paitke in Germany, and her daughter Louise, that married William Hardy, who came to this country in Presqu'île County in Belknap Township about 1865. And he brought Louise, of course, as his bride with her. Now, their daughter was Therese Hardy's, who married Julius Dramberg in 1885. Now here we're talking about Bertha Cool Rue Wetzel Paitke. First, she married Rue, and they had one daughter, Louise. This was in Germany. And Louise married William Hardy's in Germany. That's the only child of that marriage of Rue. Her second marriage after that was to Wetzel. And she had 5 children with a man named Wetzel. And this was also in Germany. Then on the third marriage, she married a man named Paitke. Now, she came to the United States about 1890, some years after her daughter had come. And they came to Belknap Township up here with the rest of the Hardy's family. Now, they had no children between the two of them, not she and Paitke. Now, Paitke had a daughter by a previous marriage, and she lived in Bay City, Michigan. But when they came here, they came up here to the Hardy's home in Belknap. Well, things weren't going too good, so they separated. He went back to Bay City, Michigan, and lived with a daughter down there. And she stayed here and started to live with her granddaughter, who was Teresa Dramberg, married to Julius Dramberg. They'd been married in 1885. And also, she had a daughter that was up here by the name of, had married a Legner. And they also lived in the Metz area. A lot of these people, when they came from Germany, came from the same area, and they settled in the same area. They weren't necessarily known to each other over there. In certain cases they were, but not always. But in a way, she lived in the Metz area for the rest of her life after she came over here in 1890. She lived for a while with the Drambergs, then she'd go and live with the Legners, get mad over there, then come back and live with the Drambergs, and back and forth and back and forth. Now, I recall her because I spent a lot of time with my grandparents out there in Metz as an elderly lady, about 5'1" or 5'2", and she spoke primarily German. Now, my brother Herman and I, of course, spoke fluent German as very young people. That was the language of choice in the house. We knew how to speak English, but to our parents and to our grandparents and to Grandma Paepke, we spoke German. Now, she was, of course, very fluent. She could read very well. She read the Bible. And Grandpa Dramberg had a subscription to one of the Detroit German language papers called the Detroit Abendblatt, which would come in by mail, sometimes 1 or 2 days late, out of Detroit. But she read that and was quite well knowledgeable about what was happening in the world. Now, some way, somehow, Mother says she doesn't know how, she had acquired also the ability to read some English and could speak some English. And so she was acquainted with the advance. And now, being from the area of Germany where she came from, of Danzig or East Pomerania, which was hard onto Poland, part of Poland and part of Germany, back and forth between the wars, she had acquired a very, very fluent knowledge of Polish. And a lot of people did that in those days. That is, they were knowledgeable about probably several languages in their immediate area. And I know that from my own remembrances out there, that when some of the Polish people would come in to see Grandpa or Grandma, who lived in that area, there were all the Szymanskis, the Maszlonkas, Santellas, Konechny's, Kapalas, that she would speak to them in German, or in Polish. And a lot of those people could understand both German and Polish. But she would rattle along with them, and of course, Dramberg didn't know any Polish. But it just so happened that Grandpa Dramberg, also from his early days, had a pretty fair knowledge of Polish, because they live right in the Polish Quarter area. That's where the Grambos came from. That's where some of the Hardises came from. That's where some of the Drambergs came from. So being bilingual was not at all strange to those people. Now, I know that Grandpa Dramberg was quite fluent in Polish because he was one of the commissioners of the poor of Presque Isle County for many, many years. That was the forerunner of Social Security. You might say not Social Security, but welfare. And he was one of the officers of the county for that section of the area, including parts of Belknap, Metz, Pulaski, Krakow, Posen. And some of these people that came to see him that wanted help, of course, were not very fluent in anything except Polish. Well, he got along pretty well with most of it, but when he would get stuck and he couldn't understand some people at all that came to see him, he had certain people in the Pulaski and Posen area that he could go for help. And one of the people that he quite often went to see, hop a horse and buggy, and go and see the people that come to him, was a man named Peter Schabella. He was the father of Tony Schabella that lived across the street from us here in Rogers City. And then there was another farmer out there that was very fluent in German and English, and Polish, and his name was Woloshik. Well, so that's the way they did those things in those days. They exchanged information. Speaking about that, being familiar with Polish, even our dad, George Grambua, he taught in the Posen area for several years at various school there. And as a result of that, he said he acquired a kind of a fair knowledge of a lot of the basic words in Polish, because 90% of the kids that he had in his class were Polish. And he said it came in very, very handy years later when he went to work at the bank. That he didn't know it all, but he did know quite a bit of it. And some of those people were people from that area who came to see him. And so that's the way it was in those years. Now, great-great-grandmother Petke apparently liked kids. I know Herman and I used to go out there, and she would read to us what were called German Märchen, fairy tales. And if she didn't have Märchen or fairy tales, she would tell us stories that she made up. And she loved to tell stories about her youth in Germany. Some of it was probably made up, but others, I suppose, she talked about picnics. She talked about dancing and carnivals and circuses. And, of course, that was well known in those days. Circuses were a common form of entertainment in Europe. She liked to sing, and which was also a very common form of entertainment, not only in Europe, but in this country. Whenever people got together for anniversaries or weddings or Sunday evenings, get-togethers, singing was a very, very common form of entertainment. I recall several occasions when, at the Dramberg home, the men who would come together, or there'd be an event of a wedding anniversary or a birthday, that these fellows would get together. The men would go into the kitchen. This was in the old Dramberg home. And there would be fellows like Grandpa Dramberg, Grandpa Grambua, Mr. Schrader, Mr. Kowaleski, Mr. Hine, Mr. Hardies. That's Edward Hardies. And there was a Rehring, there was a Littke, there was a Wiedersheim, there was a Hallman. And they would break into song, those men. They might sing for a couple hours. Most of the songs, or a lot of the songs, were probably from their youth in Europe. They were military in nature, but a lot of them were just plain peasant songs of the times, because this was from the area of Pomerania, of East Prussia, and that's where most of these people were from. Now, she would sing right along with them because she knew those songs. And she also, of course, as I say, just on her own, would sometimes be singing along there just by herself as she sat in her chair in the living room of that old home. Now, even though aged, she did do some certain amount of work, according to my mother Alma, who of course knew her as a very, very young girl, naturally. She helped start meals, while Grandma and the older girls helped with the farm chores, or worked in the fields, or was cutting hay, or was loading hay, but general farm work. All of these girls, including Mother and Bertha and Louise and Dora, knew how to handle horses. They could drive teams, they could cultivate, they knew how to hitch up a horse and buggy or a horse and sleigh. That was just natural. That was just part of living. And she would help, the old lady would help mend some clothes. She never wore glasses, that I don't recall. She knew how to knit. Mother said that she would make scarves and mittens and winter caps, or chooks as we would call them. And when the rest of the family was out in the fields and dinner was being cooked, in the oven or on top of the stove. She would watch the fire, throw in a few extra pieces of wood, or watch the bread that was being baked in the oven. And so everybody had a chore to do. Now, she was my grandmother, Teresa's grandmother, and our mother's great-grandmother, and we always referred to her just as great-grandmother Paetke. But in reality, of course, she was a great-grandmother to Mother, our mother, Alma. But if you go down the line a little bit, in my generation, to take Grace, well, Grace would have been a great-great-grandmother. And her Nancy would have been a great-great-great-grandmother. Or, Catherine. Let's say Catherine. Take Catherine, for example. Well, Catherine's daughter, Susan, would have been a great-great-great-grandmother. And Susan's son, Christian, I would have to put 5 greats in front of that, Christian, before you get it right. Great. You are the 7th generation to follow Bertha Keel Paetke. Now, that covers a lot of years, doesn't it? From 1820, when she was born, to 1994 today, that's 174 years. She was born in 1820 in Germany and died May of 1916 in Metz, Michigan, Presque Isle County, state of Michigan, USA. She was born near Danzig, the city of Danzig, which is now a part of the country of Poland, on the Baltic Sea. Today the city is a part of Poland and is called Gdansk. Now Gdansk is known in our modern history, right today, 1994, as a city where Lech Walesa, the great patriot who fought or helped to free Poland from the communists, lives. And you heard about him if you're acquainted with the recent history of Poland. Now, today, and in 1890, she didn't come to this country along with her daughter Louise, who had married Hardees. She didn't come until about 1890, along with her third husband, a man by the name of Paetke. They came to Belknap. They were sent for by Hardees, and they came to Belknap Township, to the Hardees' home. And, however, things didn't go very good. And so they separated. Paetke went back to Bay City, Michigan, where his daughter lived, who had come over earlier. And grandmother Paetke stayed here. And for the time being, the first thing she did, she moved in with Therese and Julius Granberg in Metz. And even though she had a sister, Mrs. Legner, was also in Metz. Now, as you stop to think of it, the United States of America is a very, very young country. When she was born in 1820 in Europe, in Germany, the United States of America was only 38 years old. It had received its independence from Great Britain in 1782 in the Treaty of Paris. Now, the revolution started in 1776, but the country was not recognized as independent until 1882, because Washington didn't defeat Cornwallis at Yorktown until 1881, or 1781. Now, in 1820, when she was born, slavery was still a part of the economic, social life of the United States. The Civil War hadn't been fought. In 1820, the United States had 20 of its states of the 48. The United States had not even expanded to the Pacific coast. The Louisiana Purchase had taken place in 1803, and in 1845, Texas was annexed. In 1846, the Oregon Country was finally secured from Great Britain, Oregon and Washington, parts of Idaho and parts of Montana. In 1848 rather, California was finally ceded by Mexico. And that included California, parts of New Mexico and Arizona, Utah, Nevada, parts of Colorado. In 1853, the Gadsden Purchase rounded off and completed the areas of New Mexico and Arizona. And in 1867, the United States acquired Alaska from Russia. So you see, 1820, the year she was born, there was still a lot of growing to do on the part of the United States. Now in 1820 also, some of the nations of the world were already a couple thousand years old. Take Egypt, the Ottoman Empire of Turkey, Syria, and Damascus. Then you got Iraq, the city of 1001 Nights, Arabian Nights, city of Sinbad the Sailor. And then you have Persia, Tehran, you have India, you have China, you have Japan. Those countries were already a couple thousand years old by the time that the United States came into being in 1782. So you see, by any standard, we are still today in 1994 a very, very young nation. Now just how does that fit in with great-great-grandmother Pecky? Well, it really doesn't, except to give you a perspective of just how close this one life is to the entire life of our nation. 1820, today, 1994, 174 years. Just add on to that, go back from 1820 to the 38 years on top of that, and you get about 217 years is all that the United States is in the length of the history of the nation. But one thing right now, it is the oldest single continuous form of government in the history of the world. We haven't changed our form of government. Every other nation of the world has changed its form of government in that period of time. And we still are operate under the Constitution of the United States of America. Now, great-grandmother Pecky get back down. Great-great-grandmother Pecky died May 16th, 1916, at the age of 96. I have a very good picture of her that includes grandmother Gramberg, great-grandmother Pecky, and Herman and I, taken in April of 1916 by my mother, Donna Gramberg. Now, her funeral at St. Peter's Church in Metz, which is still there, was the first funeral that I ever attended or recall. Herman was also there. And what impressed me most, not what happened in the church, but what happened in the cemetery, which is immediately adjacent to the church on the church grounds, was watching that casket being lowered into an open grave, an open hole in the ground. I was not aware of anything unusual that had taken place there. But our mother, Alma, told me on several occasions that just as the casket was being lowered into the grave, some male voice started to sing. And soon 6 or 8 other older men joined to a German farewell song. It was on the order of taps, or an epitaph. Verses, everybody was just amazed. And Mother said it was very beautiful and very emotional. These men who were doing the singing all came from the same area in Germany where she was from. It was just a local custom. It was a tribute to a Landsman, as they called it, a countryman. Mother said that neither she nor Grandmother Gramberg had ever seen or heard of it before or since. They questioned Grandfather Gramberg about it afterwards. And he said he had seen it in Germany, knew the song, and so just joined in when it started. They did not, he did not know who started it, but it could have been a Wiedersheim, it could have been a Hallman, it could have been a Schrader, it could have been a Kowaleski, it could have been a Hardis. He said he just joined in the singing. He said it was nothing more than just a tribute to a fine old lady. Even today, when I go to that cemetery at St. Peter's Church in Metz, I can still picture that event of nearly 80 years ago. That cemetery holds many of the early members of the Grambua and Dramberg and Hardis families that pioneered the Metz area. So that's my memory and recollection of great-great-grandmother Paetke. Now, I think before I do any more taping, I believe that I should say something about the tapes so far. Remember that I'm asking myself questions, and in certain cases my answers are a little vague, or sometimes they're a little bit confused. That's because most of this is just plain extemporaneous. I'm talking, and all at once I'm thinking of something else. I pause and get off the track. I know that there are repetitions. I know that certain names are somewhat confused. Sometimes I use the wrong name or the wrong date. Or I, as I say, trip, stumble, or fumble the ball. But I realize that this is just for the family, and that I'm just plain talking. As I said before, it would be a lot easier if somebody was asking me the questions about what happened many years ago. Well, my memory and recall is still good. Remember that I did have a period of time, not too long ago, that I talked about a lot of these things with our mother Alma, who was here in the extended care at Rogers City for approximately 8 years. And I visited her frequently, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week. And several occasions it would be hours at a time, and she would get wound up and she would want to talk. She would want to reminisce. And so I picked up a lot of additional information about her years. And of course she had many, as you recall, 102. Now during that period of time, on certain occasions, she would want to talk German. I didn't necessarily want to talk German because I had lost a good amount of my vocabulary over the years, but nevertheless, I accommodated and did the best I could, and she would help me out in translating some of the vocabulary, some of the words that I had completely lost. But she wanted to memorize. And so many things were brought up fresh. In certain cases, I surprised her with things that I remembered. And she wanted to know, well, how did you know that? And I said, well, I was either there or you told me, or if you didn't tell me, maybe Dad did, or possibly it came from Grandma and Grandpa Dramber. And as you probably know, I spent an awful lot of time with Grandma and Grandpa Dramber. Now, of course, on the other hand, many of the things I knew, I had learned from Grandpa Dramberg in the long period of time that we spent together in St. Louis, Missouri, back in 1919, 1920, 22. And he was a good teacher. He was a very good teacher. And in certain cases, he insisted that I write German. He even taught me some of the fundamentals of writing German script. And then I tried in a few instances to write Mother in German script. That's not easy to do. And for a young kid who was more interested in going outside and playing soccer on the hospital playground with the rest of the kids, it was very, very hard to do. But nevertheless, he felt it was important. And he also felt important that we keep up our German. And in certain cases, he insisted, just like Mother did, that I talk German when the two of us were just together in the room. And so I kind of kept up my German, became quite fluent in it by the time I came back to Rogers City from St. Louis. So you'll have to please forgive the pauses that appear on the tapes. And of course there are other certain cases where pauses appear. Just like I did a few minutes ago, the doorbell rang. And I went out there, and whoever it is was across the street, and I couldn't gather his attention, so I don't know what he wanted. Or the phone rings. A few hours ago, the phone rang, and it was Ernestine. And she wanted to just talk and say hello. Yesterday afternoon, the phone rang, and it was George and Martha. They called from Lansing, which they sometimes do, probably once a week, and we exchange information. As you know, I occasionally go down there for a week or 10 days to spend with George and Martha. Or the kettle boils, and I have to go and shut it off. I want to make some coffee. Or I have to go to the refrigerator and get a beer. Things break up my train of thought. And I come back, and I'm not on the right place at the right time. But as Jackie Gleason used to say in his TV program, well, and away we go. Hi. While there's still a little tape left on the reel, I thought I might tell you about our old home at 395 South 3rd here in Rogers City. I do drive by it frequently, and I can tell you that it looks very good. The present owner is named Gilmet, keeps the lawns and trees and shrubbery well trimmed. I have met Mrs. Gilmet. I have never met, but he works in the State Department of Social Services in Alpena. He drives back and forth every day like other people from Rogers City do who work in Alpena. He hopes sometime to be transferred to the Rogers City office. They have 3 small children, under 5. She said they both like the big home, very, very much. I was in that house with just a previous owner, Mrs. Schmalt. She invited me in one day when I stopped to introduce myself, and the house on the inside was well kept, well furnished, and the woodwork and doors and all the trim were the same, and I explained a certain amount of the origin of the wood in the trim of that house and how it came from a big pine that had survived the Metz fire of 1908 and was later cut down by my mother and dad with some help. It was taken to a mill and sawed into various pieces of lumber, which was later used to build the home as we see it there today back in 1911, 12. In the pantry of that house, where you will recall, there was probably 4 or 5 large door sections of leaded glass in the cupboards that had all been redone. The cracked and chipped pieces of glass had been sent someplace, the whole units, and the glass had all been retightened and beautiful shine to it. It looked very, very nice. Mother and Dad's room in that house, or bedroom, was a TV and music room. Looked very nice. And the back bedroom, she said, was for the kids, and there was also a bed in there they could use for company. They used all the bedrooms upstairs. Everybody slept upstairs. Now, I did not get upstairs because those stairs are still the same one, and for an old 82-year man on crutches, it's a pretty hard go. So I didn't get up there. And the same was true in the basement. The basement railings had been taken off, going down the stairs. For what reason, I don't know, and she didn't know, because that had been done previously. She said that the basement had been partitioned off, and but she didn't know the origin of that either. I explained to her about the old flowing well that was used previous to the time that city water came into the community and where it was located. And I also explained the location of the old cesspools and septic tanks that was used before the city sewer was put in, which came down the alley. I explained about the old garage that was originally been a horse barn. And as I went in there, I noticed that the floor had been changed over to an all-concrete floor. You remember, it was wooden, big wooden, heavy boards in those days. The old opening to the hayloft and the old wooden ladder that went up there is still there. And now it's got to the second floor of the garage. And I explained to her that it had been originally been a horse barn. Well, she said somebody had told her that, but she said it was hard for her to visualize. Well, I said that opening going up to the second floor is where they threw the hay down. And I said, the hayloft has a great big door opening on the alley side. Yes, she said she had noticed that. Well, I said, that was very common. And I said, in the early days, I said, many homes did have horse barns. And I said that this place right here, I said, it was primarily for small carriage horses, not great big plow horses. If a farmer came into town, or if my parents wanted to go out of town, they got a horse and a buggy the night before, put up the horse. There was a supply of hay, there were cribs, there were oat bins, and everything was all in shape. And when you needed hay, you went up to the loft and threw some down. And the manure that accumulated on the floor, you picked up and you put on the garden. She said, well, how about the car? Well, I said, in the early days, I said, before World War I, I said, my parents didn't have a car. You could tell that it was kind of puzzling on her face. I said, the car came after World War I. Now, I said, there were a few other cars in town already, but I said, my parents just didn't happen to have one, and most of the people in town didn't. And so if they wanted to go out of town, you used a horse and sleigh. And that's why I said many, many homes, even in the immediate area, did have horse barns. And she said it was hard for her to visualize that era of the horse and buggy, but she said she had seen it in movies. I explained, however, that we did have a train that came into town starting about 1911 when the Michigan Limestone Chemical Company started its operation. And that we also, until the late 20s, did have a passenger and freight service by boat. There were large docks located in the vicinity of which is now the swimming beach here in Roger City, where these passenger boats would come in. Passengers would get in or get off. You could, and I said on certain occasions, I don't know how many times, I did go by boat with my parents to Toledo or to Detroit or to Cleveland to get medical attention for treatment of polio, which I had contacted along about 1913. Now, also, I might say this. The other old homes in the immediate area surrounding our home on 3rd Street and Woodward are also well maintained. The Bertram House, where Dorothy Bertram Free still lives, well maintained. The old Ascot House, later purchased by Tony Chabella and Ann, well maintained. Ann Chabella is age 90, and I see her occasionally. She still works in her flower garden and vegetable garden, and lived there since probably about 1928, as I remember. The Hilla House next door, which I call the Yule House, you remember as the Hilla House. The Yules left in 1919, right after World War I, and went to California. One of the boys, Paul Yule, I still correspond a couple times a year. We write back and forth. He lives on Balboa Island, a little island in the vicinity of Los Angeles proper. That was the Mrs. Yule, of course, was Edna Heft, the daughter of P.H. Heft. Then the immediate house next door, which I call the Clara Brown House, was Clara Heft Brown. She was another daughter of P.H.'s. We know that house, and you'll remember that house as the Carter House. It is also very well kept. That house now is owned by Eugene and Helen Duretsky McLean. Ernestine and Treese, of course, know Helen. She was in their class in high school. Now, the Davidson home, which was just up the street, which you remember, they had a daughter, Emma Jean. That house was moved off that lot maybe 10 years ago. The Dick Harmon house and the Krutsky house, the McDonald house, and the Bob Crittenden house just in back of our old home along Woodward Avenue are all well kept today. Very nice, still nice homes. Now, the old ball grounds, which we say is the ball grounds where they played baseball and football, is now known as Westminster Park. It's a nice lawns, nice shrubbery, and in the center of that park is the old gazebo grandstand that was used by the city band on the courthouse when you were kids. It is occasionally used today for concerts, although the main concert now is at the city park on the lake. And but they occasionally use it, and the park is beautiful. The park is well maintained. Well, so much for today. See you later.